So today we're talking about one of the most important parts of homeschool parenting and also one of the most annoying. I feel like I am coming here today to bring you bad news. And that is, you have to actually look at the work that your kids are doing. And let me tell you, I have learned that the hard way. And the funny thing is I've learned it the hard way on both ends. So you think that I would have known. I know that on the end of being the student, and I know that on the end of being the parent. Having learned it as a student, I should be much better at checking work than I have been and sometimes still am, because it turns out that it's a lot of work. It turns out that there's a reason why I was able to get away with what I got away with as a homeschool student. I mean, when I was 11 and 12, which, just saying, most difficult age for homeschooling, puberty, right? Everything's happening. People are not reasonable. My mom had twins at that time. And so I didn't feel like I was cheating or rebelling or anything, although my feelings were incorrect. My feelings were self-deception. But I believed in my heart that if I spent an hour with the math book trying to do something with it, that counted as doing math. I was done with math if I had spent an hour with the math book and lined paper in front of me trying to make sense of something. I was done. I checked off math for the day. I did math. Who could expect more? I was expected to check with the answer key, self-checking. But that seemed like a waste of time because it's not like I cared whether or not I got them right. And I didn't. And I mean twins. So everything was kind of rough and tumble at that moment. Ashley says that she remembers handing her mom a history workbook with a bunch of squiggly lines that she was sure her mom would believe was handwriting. That is awesome. Kayla says, I've often wondered how my mom did anything else in life except correct my schoolwork. Well, that's what it feels like on the mom side, isn't it? Because of my experience then, I do not have my children self-correct. I know that does work for some people, but when I have asked in those situations where the mom says, well, my kids just check their own work and we talk about it if they have a problem. It's like, oh, that sounds so nice and lovely. One, do you actually ever look at the work? Does he actually ever come to you with a problem? Because that's clue number one, that it's not really happening. Does a student who is supposed to come to you if he has a problem actually ever come to you? Because there are going to be problems that need instruction, clarification, tutoring, especially at 11 or 12 or 13. We're not talking 17, 18 here. We're talking middle school, freshman year of high school, where it seems like they really ought to be independent and they look responsible and they seem way more capable than everyone else in the household, and there's so much to do to keep track of all the little ones that we can push off more responsibility than they're actually able to handle. We need to be careful with that. What I have found with the families who say that their kids check their own math and come to them with questions, and that's working for them, is that all of that is happening with mom in the loop. So it's not mom is running errands, doing housework, off hither and yon, not paying attention to the school setting, but she's at the table. The kids are at the table. She's right there when they're self-checking. Like, she's seeing them do their work. She's seeing them check their work, and she's right there. So when something comes up, it's easy. So yes, then they're self-checking, but there's still a presence, an accountability happening there where she's still pretty. The real key to what's going on when the self-checking works or the mom checking happens, the common denominator and the real key is mom paying attention. And if mom isn't paying attention to what's going on, we cannot reasonably expect the children to be paying attention either to their own work. Now, they ought to be paying attention to their own work, but we ought to also. And so if we aren't doing what we are supposed to be doing, they are probably not doing what they are supposed to be doing. And that's really hard because I know that it's like, well, I have so many things that I ought to be doing. I can't do it all. And we can't do it all. That is 100% true. But we have to look at what we are spending our time on, look what is demanding our attention, and recognize that we can't have unreasonable expectations of our children. And it is actually unreasonable to expect them to pay more attention to their work than you are paying attention to them. Lauren has her kids correct her own math, and she has 2. And they have to show me their mistakes and identify what kind of mistake it is, and they come to me with questions. So, again, I'm going to assume you're paying attention and noticing if they never have any mistakes, like, that's a problem. And she says she grades their tests. So that's like spot checking. So there's a procedure in place where where there is actually accountability. And that is key. And being actually available to answer questions. Using the answer key to do the math lesson. That has happened. So on the encouraging side of things, cheating, what good can actually come from the situation when we discover that our kids have been cheating in one form or another. Some are more subtle than others. I've seen the spectrum. There are stories in here. Multiple students. And partly that's because I'm dense and not following through on what I know I need to do, which is not expect what I don't inspect. But on the other side of things, we are helping our children learn and grow and mature. And that means parenting them, guiding them, teaching them through their mistakes and through their sin. Bringing conviction of sin and helping them go through that process of receiving forgiveness, making it right, saying that they were wrong, admitting out loud and to God that they were wrong, and then receiving forgiveness, restoring fellowship. That's a process that is important in their development, in their growing up years. And so it's not the end of the world when we do find that our children are cheating. It's so easy to fall into the modern idea of what people are like, the nature of people. And the modern, secular, non-Christian world believes that people are naturally good, that our default setting is to do good things and want to be good. But the Bible teaches us otherwise. The gospel is going to need to be applied in our homes every day. So we can't go into our day expecting that we don't actually need gospel today, expecting that if I did everything right, if I set up my systems correctly, if I picked the right curriculum, if I had the best attitude all day long, then my children wouldn't ever display sin problems. But a big part of parenting, an important part that we get to also apply in our children's education, is pointing out their sin, helping them recognize that they are sinful, that they need a savior, that they can't trust themselves because their little hearts will lie to them, like mine did when I was 12, where my heart told me that sitting in front of a math book and writing numbers on a notebook page was doing math, and doing math was all that I was supposed to do. The more they can learn that lesson, the more prepared they are going to be to enter adulthood with maturity. So we aren't expecting them to never have problems. We aren't expecting that if we have done everything correctly, they will never cheat or lie. They're going to. They're gonna, without being bad kids. That is the tendency of our sin nature. And for the good kids, it'll be more subtle. So we need to be praying that God gives us the insight and that he removes the subtlety factor from our good kids, from ourselves, so that we can bring, and God can bring, conviction of sin, because it's only when that conviction comes that we can repent and then receive forgiveness and walk in newness of life. So we have a responsibility as parents to be checking our kids' work, to be paying attention to them, discipling them, to be modeling and leading in caring about the work that we have assigned by paying attention to it, by checking in on them, by looking at it, by caring about the quality of their work. And if we aren't looking at it and commenting on it and helping them with it, then we aren't caring about it. No matter what, again, our hearts can be deceitful too. It's like, no, I care about it, like in a philosophical, theoretical sense, just not really. So our kids are only going to care about their work in the same way that we care about it. They aren't going to come at it with a philosophical, theoretical caring. And if we don't model and require actual, real-time caring about the work, they're never going to learn that. Caring about their work, caring about the quality of their work, the consistency of their work, does not come naturally for most kids. There are some who it does. But that kind of caring often comes with its own set of challenges, character challenges. So, but for the most part, they will learn caring about their work, which includes paying attention to it, not dawdling, all of that. If we're there at their elbow, helping them, like pulling them back, making them redo it, until they realize, like, oh, if I just make it better the first time, then mom won't make me redo it. And because redoing it's really obnoxious. But that comes only after requiring redos a lot. And then I think every growth spurt, maturity, puberty, hormonal spurt, like sets the kids back. And things that they had learned and were doing have to be relearned. And can be frustrating and discouraging, and we can feel like we must have done something wrong at those points. Oh, Beth has a motto, do it nice or do it twice. I love it. When they have to relearn those lessons, when they did care about their work, and now they went through a growth spurt, they went through puberty, and now it seems like they don't anymore. It's like, what happened to my child? It's like they are leveling up. So maturity and that's the path that we're on with our kids. We're taking them from babies and preschoolers up into adulthood. And that is not a straight line. So we often curriculum plan and set our expectations as if, we're building on what we did before, and it's going to be only ever upward, 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 next block, next block. But it's a graph, and every growth spurt and puberty is a dip before it goes back up. But you can't really get to that next plane without the dip. Like, the dip is indicating that they are about to jump up a level, or that they are in the process of jumping up a level, and they lose their math facts. They lose their composure. They lose various parts of their reason during those points. But those are not phases that then you just wait it out and wait till they're reasonable again. Like, those are the intense parenting moments that you're not trying to prevent by your parenting. But in that moment, you are helping them set the stage for their next level of growth and maturity. In their next phase, will they still have to do these things, or was that just while they were preschoolers and toddlers? Because it does change. The way that we expect obedience and the way that we parent and what we do with our children does change as they hit those milestones and grow and develop, and it needs to. And so every time when they are hitting those, they're not plateaus, they're dips. They are figuring out who they are, how they relate to the world and their parents and other people, and we're helping them gain responsibility. We are holding the line and helping them mature well. And it's intense, and it's exhausting, and it's parenting. And it's going to be way worth it, because I will tell you, it is pretty awesome to have an 18-year-old son. He's almost 19, my oldest, who's on his own, has a full-time job, has made decisions, like bought his own car, made job decisions that's like, oh, that's not what I would have done. That's not what I would have suggested, but okay. Comes to church and sits with us, taller than me. He's a grown-up. It's pretty awesome to have a grown-up son. So just hold on and work with your kids, knowing that your goal isn't that tomorrow be an easier day. But your goal is helping this child in front of you who's pushing the line and trying to figure out the world all over again. It's going to bear fruit. It's going to bear fruit when they're adults. And then you don't really always, there is a sense in which some of that fruit isn't happening in your home. You're not giving yourself immediate payoff. You're giving yourself the delight of adult children. Yes, it does help for boys in those leveling up phases to have dad or grandpa or male figures to step in and help them, because they, as men growing up into young adults, have to pull away from their mom. They have to become men. And so we have to hold the line and be in charge, and they have to assert their independence. And that's a struggle. And that's really, really hard for mom and the son to figure out. One thing that helped both of my boys with that was doing actual classes where I was not their teacher. So from like 16 on, I wasn't really their teacher. For 16, I was the administrator of video, different things. Dad checked their math. And then 17, they did community college. We ended up just graduating our second son a year early so he could go into actual college at a private college here in town. So he's going to be living at home, but a college freshman. My oldest son did community college for 2 years and graduated high school with his AA degree. But at 16, they got jobs outside the home with a boss. Having someone else other than mom that they were responsible to was a huge help in their leveling up of maturity and their getting over that need to push back against mom. Our relationship was better when they had someone else they were responsible for work and for school. And I could be their mom, but not their boss. Yes. Set up co-ops where your kids can have other teachers as they hit those teen years. Anyway, so I'm teaching at a co-op this fall, new area, new things, but I'm going to be teaching a class and my 9-year-old will be in the class and that will be fun. But my 12-year-old boy is going to be all with someone else. And I was even able to get, one of them is a male teacher. So a pastor teaches Old Testament history to middle school boys. It's like, okay, we're doing that. I think one thing that we as moms tend to get, we tend to get ourselves into trouble when our expectations are out of line with reality. And we think that the time that we put in to building good habits when they're little, which we need to do, it's really super, super duper important. But we tend to assume that that work that we put down when they're little that the payoff of that means that we won't have to actually work at parenting them later. But what we need to do at each level of their development is help them reinforce those good habits. We have to lay them down, as the rails when they're little. But then we have to hold the line as they go through those developmental bumps, and they need to learn that the habits still matter, that they don't expire, that they aren't just for preschoolers and toddlers, but they're for people. When we lay down the rails of good habits when they're little, that allows us to be dealing with deeper and more important issues as they get older without some of the basics tripping us up. So when, say, you teach your 18-month-old, 2-year-old, 3-year-old to obey you and keep a cheerful attitude and not whine and not complain and control their responses, that's hard work. It's important work. It's our work of parenting. And it doesn't mean that if you do that consistently for 2 years when they're in preschool, they will never, ever disobey you again. But it does mean that when they disobey you, you have a past to point them back to. You have a set of rails, a rut that they climbed out of it, and you can push them back into it more readily. But it does change because obedience looks different for a 2-year-old and a 10-year-old. And then eventually they do mature out of obedience into deference. And so it's a normal process for that to be questioned and developed in your relationship. Get older moms, be in their company, listen to them, ask questions, have them over to see what's going on in your home and maybe speak to what's actually happening, because sometimes what's actually happening, our perspective is just out the window and we need someone else's eyes to say, like, what's actually going on here? When we're checking our kids' work and teaching them to, start their letters at the top and look at your checklist and, finish your math before lunch, or whatever kind of habits that we begin instilling when they're little, or as they begin their schoolwork, we are doing that to create the norm for our family. Obedience, doing your work with diligence. We start small with our early students, and we are creating the normal for our family with those habits. We are not creating smooth and easy days for the rest of our homeschool once we can check the box that those habits are in place. So that when they're 10 and 12 and they're independent learners, we can kind of check out. And when you say it that way, it's like, oh yeah, well, I guess that makes sense. It's really easy to fall into that kind of thinking, especially because teaching those habits, checking up on our kids, paying attention to what they're doing is so intense and exhausting. To try to convince ourselves to do it and remind ourselves that it's important, we look for the payoff. We remind ourselves that there's going to be a payoff, which is good and true, but we set our eyes on the wrong payoff. Or we look forward to the next phase, which is going to be different than what we are currently in, but we don't realize that there's just a different level of exhausting and intense. And so then when the next phase comes, it doesn't feel like a payoff. And so then I throw up our hands and say, none of that worked, or I must have done something wrong, when you're actually you just leveled up. Your kids leveled up and you leveled up. And this is, you were in arithmetic and now you're in algebra as a parent. And just like our kids might have some arguments and throw some fits about letters and formulas and all of that being in that, like they had just figured out math. And now here you come messing up the system and making it more complicated than it needs to be. I've had a few algebra students. I've been one of those algebra students. But we do the same thing as parents with our kids, and think that once we get the arithmetic system in place, we're going to be done. And actually, we just laid the groundwork for being able to do algebra. Can't really get to the algebra until you've done the arithmetic. So it's not that the arithmetic doesn't matter or isn't good enough, and it's not that having that arithmetic under your belt made the math hard. It did lay a strong foundation that you really can't do well in the algebra without the arithmetic. And sometimes there's some backtracking that has to happen. So it works the same. And that is one of, I think, the biggest lessons I have learned in homeschooling, is that all of those struggles that I see in my students, that I hear from my students, that I have to deal with my students, I have those same struggles. This is just being a person, a human. And I am walking with them through those struggles, not in a way where I am expecting to give them a struggle-free life, but where they and myself are learning how to struggle well, how to do it well, which is allowing the conviction of sin, repenting, receiving the forgiveness, rejoicing in the restored fellowship, and not expecting that to be a once and done thing. That applies across the board. And checking our kids' work gives us an occasion over and over again to go through that process. And if we go through that process over and over again, we are doing our job. We aren't being thwarted. We are doing our job. It can feel like we're being thwarted, but that just means that our goal, our payoff vision is misaligned, is wrong. And we need to align ourselves with our actual calling. The goal isn't smooth and easy, comfortable, and struggle-free. The goal is learning how, what do we do when we have a hard time? What do we do when we sin? What do we do when people sin against us? These are all situations that our kids, that people need lots of practice in. And we have the duty and blessing and privilege of giving our kids practice in these things over and over and over again. So when we recognize what they need discipleship in, we're recognizing our calling and our responsibility, but we aren't recognizing necessarily our failures. We're just seeing where our duty lies right now. And so we are being called to work there. This is the kind of pep talk that the Convivial Homeschool is full of. They are short little chapters that tell it like it is, give the real life story. I will tell you, while I was working on my book, I felt like our homeschool was probably pretty bad, actually. Because I spent the whole time I was writing the book, I was taking our worst homeschool moments and applying the gospel to them and showing how the gospel applies. So I was like, all of my remembrances of our homeschool was all the worst moments. And there were plenty. I could fill a book with stories. My editor told me every single chapter needs a story. After it was being printed and published, I had to go through and remember that there were good moments also. So if you want to hear all the bad homeschool moments and still be encouraged to dig in and do the real work, then this is what Convivial Homeschool is about.